Warning, genuine, actual warning, this video is kind of deliberately full of controversial opinions, and the only person out there capable of determining whether or not they merit taking offense is you, dear viewer. I'm going to be expressing my opinions that may be negative regarding things that you might regard positively, and both points of view are valid and, I would argue, necessary in a fair and balanced society so that diversity exists in all forms of media, because the alternative would be a bleak, tepid landscape of unchanging emptiness if everyone were in perfect agreement about every little thing. Ahem. In not so many words, I'm about to say some stuff that I believe that you might not necessarily agree with. Don't be a total if you don't see things the way I do. Okay? Okay, let's go. Well, a solid how diddly do you do be doing, my lovely people. I am Tessellating Hexagons, and I'm going to open this video with a genuine philosophical question that I pondered myself whilst writing this script. What, in all honesty, is the purpose of this video? You see, today I'm discussing my personal top 10 most overrated video games. And from that title alone, you can immediately tell that what I'm going to say might well come across as inflammatory to, like, 10 overlapping fanbases. So, am I doing this just to annoy those people? Just to get a reaction? Just to get attention? Well, no. Am I doing this to put myself on a pedestal and act all holier than thou because my taste in video games differs from yours, and on that basis I believe myself to be in some way superior to the masses? Again, no. Then why am I doing this? In all honesty, I can't say I'm sure. I suppose I just want to express my own views in areas where I know people are unlikely to take my side, to show that these opposing viewpoints exist and explain why I hold these beliefs. Who knows? Maybe a handful of viewers out there will find that they feel the way I do about some of these games and take heart in knowing that someone out there, i.e. me, agrees with them in such a way that makes them feel validated. But, I don't know. Predominantly this video is here to entertain and not aggravate. So if you feel annoyed at anything I say in this video, pause it, maybe click away, or, at worst, just reevaluate how you approach disembodied voices in pre-recorded online video media in general. Just a thought. Anyway, I feel as though we should establish a few ground rules when it comes to this list, so we're all on the same page as far as what's considered fair game goes, no pun intended. Firstly, and most obviously, the game has to have received some kind of significant critical acclaim, and enjoy, or have at some point enjoyed, a period of prolonged public approval to the point of being along the lines of a household name, like you could say it to a non-gamer and they might have heard of it. Coincidentally, all 10 games that appear on this list actually also feature on Wikipedia's list of video games considered to be the best. That isn't where I got these games from, but it is a happy coincidence that sort of validates the choices I've made here. Secondly, that old YouTube countdown standby of one representative per franchise, with the caveat that there can be a few entries on this list that can't be pinned down to a single game necessarily, but rather an entire sub-series as a whole. As long as that's recognisable enough, that's fine. Also, there is one game in this list that had an HD remaster, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And lastly, and perhaps most controversially, house rule that I don't have to have played the games in question firsthand, provided that I have sufficient experience of them to be able to discuss them at length, and to have formed actual opinions on them, rather than just knee-jerk reactions to what I think something might be like. Please. I might be going against the grain here, but I'm not completely unreasonable. Oh, and 2 quick side notes. Just because a game doesn't appear on this list doesn't mean to say that I agree with popular opinions on it one way or the other. For instance, it goes without saying that I absolutely cannot stand the hideousness that is the Call of Duty series, but I don't intend to talk about it because A, that's too easy of a target, and 2, I don't want footage of that garbage dirtying up my video. Also, this kinda goes without saying, but overrated does not automatically mean bad. It just means other people are really loud about how much they like it and I don't like it to that same degree. A game, a song, or anything really can be overrated while still being good. You feel? So with that in place, let's begin, shall we? Number 10. Right, let's start with something relatively tame, shall we? Kicking off this list, we have a staple of quite a few modern gamers' childhoods, as well as the first of 7 Nintendo-flavoured entries on this list. To be fair, it comes as no surprise that the biggest, oldest, 100% gaming-focused company would churn out the most games that get the kind of reaction I'm looking for this list. But I digress. What I'm getting at is, I don't enjoy the whole Yoshi's Island formula. It's bizarre in a way. It's no secret that Yoshi is one of my all-time favourite entities from the Mario canon, as well as my main in the Mario Party series, and yet, when it came time for T. Yoshi Saw Munchakoopas to get a spin-off of his own, I just wasn't feeling it at all. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciate the game's charming, childlike aesthetic, and it brings a lot of cool ideas to the table, including the 20 red coins hidden in every level, indistinguishable from regular coins until you collect them, the 5 flowers that serve as ordinary collectibles besides them, and the way the game handles its version of HP, all blended seamlessly with level design that makes great use of Yoshi's unique moveset anyway, but honestly, there are 2 things that turn me off from it. First of all, there's more than a few levels in the game that run just long enough, or just hard enough, or both, that I just rapidly lose interest. And secondly, and chiefly, yes, the health system in the game is very clever, but it just fills me with dread, anxiety, and paranoia. In short, you start with 10 HP, and you can collect more up to a maximum of 30, and if you lose any, it does refill by itself, but only as far as 10. The problem is, that number isn't Yoshi's actual health, it's a countdown timer for how long you can be separated from Mario before he's stolen by the game's antagonists, resulting in an instant game over. And in this particular game, Mario is but a baby, so for that entire 10 to 30 seconds of agony while you scramble to catch him before running out of time, he's crying, and loudly, and my heart just can't handle that. I'm a soppy old floof at heart. Still, no harm, no foul. In my not liking the original Yoshi's Island, it can't wound me quite as much that Yoshi's Island DS, and then later New Yoshi's Island on the 3DS, proceeded to rip more and more away from the original concept to make it even less enjoyable, with worse level designs, even more annoying babies, and what might as well be an anti-soundtrack. I might not enjoy the games anyway, but my heart does go out to their fans just the same. Number 9. Right, if you know me well enough, then this next entry should come as very little surprise. For one, I am absolutely not a fan of stealth sections in video games, so it's utterly bizarre that I Let's Played Sly Cooper and liked it, but that's a discussion for another time. For another, the whole spy action thriller genre just generally isn't my cup of tea, he says, fully aware that the entire Spy Kids quadrilogy is actually visible on the shelf in the background. And my favourite book of all time happens to also include those themes. Tristan Blackwolf, The Laputin Factor, go and check it out, it's a good book. Okay, I'm not a fan of over-the-top, taking itself seriously, adult-orientated spy stuff. How about that? So, literally anything and everything James Bond-related completely passed me by as a youth. And the only reason I know anything about the films now is because they keep coming up as answers on TV game shows, and that's literally it. Nevertheless, I'm familiar enough with Nintendo 64's interpretation of GoldenEye. Granted, I've never played it myself, but I know enough about it to know that I wouldn't enjoy it if I did. Credit where it's due, it's probably one of the best handled licensed games of all time, you know, since video games based on films or TV shows usually tend to be utter garbage cash grabs and nothing but, and as I understand it, it did major work for the whole industry in terms of games of this style, but I just don't enjoy this sort of thing, and I can't accept a game that thoroughly rebukes my interest at every possible turn as one of the true greatest games of all time. Perhaps, a part of that is how popular the multiplayer mode of the game was, and while I did grow up with a Nintendo 64 of my own, I didn't have any gamer friends growing up, so the only player 2 I ever had at my disposal was Mama Hex, and bless her, she's not exactly on my level, though to her credit, she has been improving very, very recently, but nevertheless. Since, again, it's not gameplay that I would enjoy, even if I had friends to play it with, I suspect the much celebrated multiplayer mode would have left me even more out in the cold. The Goldeneye, if you will. No? Okay, moving on. Number 8. Bearing in mind I've already said my piece about Yoshi's Island, this next entry might might make you think that I have some kind of vendetta against SNES titles that are classic, that have distinct art styles and celebrated soundtracks, but no, I assure you that is just a coincidence. In a more generous world, I'd put the entire Donkey Kong Country trilogy at this spot in the list, but if I have to pick just one entry in the series, let's go with the one that started it all. Once again, and I won't be saying this much more in this video, don't worry, I respect what this game stood for. Rare, back when they were market leaders, did some amazing things technically with this game and others of its time, making 3D models and pre-rendered level graphics and then condensing them down into a not hideous sprite form to get the most possible mileage out of the game's cartridges possible. And there's a good variety of gameplay styles amongst those levels too, so I suppose it's an objectively good game. The problem is, much like Yoshi's Island, I just never got into it. Something about the punishingness of having to find every little secret area in order to properly complete a level, much like with the collectibles in Yoshi's Island, and finding the 4 hidden letters to spell out Kong, as well as the kind of almost muddy looking color palette. Something about all that just never grabbed me. To me, it was just another platformer with a protagonist who dies in one hit. Not exactly my definition of fun. I think the main reason people are so quick to defend it, apart from the graphical style, is the soundtrack. Just the sheer mention of the words aquatic ambience or stickerbush symphony are enough to get classic gamers frothing up the mouth. And while it's true that David Wise and his team did some creative stuff, much like the graphics department, the music just never hooked me. At most, it gave me a touch of the lethargic melancholies, so I can appreciate their musical qualities and atmosphere, it did get me feeling some type of way, but neither one, nor anything from the Donkey Kong Country series as a whole, would even make it into my top 100 video game soundtrack pieces of all time. Ooh, now there's an idea for a video. Number 7. Now here's a slightly awkward item in the countdown. I want to talk ever so briefly about Secret of Mana, originally for the SNES. And while I will still argue that it's overrated, it sort of seems like the internet already agrees with me on this one, thanks to its lackluster remake at the start of last year. Perhaps it's not so much that it isn't good, as that it just doesn't hold up over time. Well, so be it. Maybe I was too young to properly appreciate it when I played it for myself, but this is a very rare instance of a game that I bought, started playing, and genuinely lost interest so quickly and so heavily that I just stopped playing a little ways in and never picked it up again because of how disinterested and how dissatisfied I was with the experience. Having since watched a 100% Let's Play of the remake, it really seems like I wasn't missing out on much after all. It might not be fair to say that it strikes me as a really generic high fantasy RPG, but this, and the likes of Tales of Symphonia and goodness knows how many other games of its ilk, all start to blur together in my head pretty quickly with their basic use of recurring fantasy-related imagery and names, such as Yggdrasil, the World Tree from Norse mythology, or elemental spirits with generic mythological names like Sylph and Undine and so on. Maybe it really stood out at the time, but playing it with fresh eyes in the modern era, I really don't think it holds up quite as much as people's rose-tinted glasses make them want to believe. I mean, no offense, but in the footage I'm showing, unless you're someone who's majorly into Dungeons & Dragons type stuff, including the whole rolling dice and calculating whatever kind of aspect, does this not look kind of really unengaging and stagnant? True, the half-assed cartoonish 3D remaster hardly does that any favours, but the original's core gameplay was no different either. Number 6. Hey, remember what I was saying earlier about having no interest in stealth-related stuff? Well, what if I told you that there was a game series out there that functions more or less like if James Bond and Kingdom Hearts had some kind of love child out of wedlock? You might think that sounds amazing. I think it sounds like a headache. I won't deny that Hideo Kojima is a very talented individual, a visionary if you will, but at the pinnacle of the entire Metal Gear franchise we have the Metal Gear Solid series. If you think that's confusing by itself, strap yourself in for one of the most overblown and confusing narratives of all time, woven into, once again, a game that really does not interest me. Now, don't misunderstand, if you enjoy that sort of thing, you're not wrong to do so. I just don't feel that the series has enough universal universal appeal to justify calling it one of the greatest game series or experiences of all time. If nothing else, I'm somewhat floored that an overarching narrative can take itself so seriously and so not seriously at all at the same time. The same franchise that delivers over-the-top elements of comic relief and convoluted storytelling ideas also tackles very real, very serious themes and expects to be taken fully seriously in so doing. It expects you to be amused by the comedic elements whilst still being invested enough to piece together its really complicated narrative, and I'm sorry, but that's just not going to happen. And I'm not saying that you can't juxtapose seriousness with levity like this, but you can't expect your audience to be fully immersed and in a total state of suspended disbelief when you pull tricks like a guy whose lines change to taunt you based on what other save data you have on your console's memory card. True, that is a clever thing that really left an impression on me, but between the gameplay and the crossed wires in terms of tone and seriousness, I can't help but feel thoroughly disconnected from the whole experience. For me, at least, the only timeless thing to come out of the whole MGS situation is the sound effect. But maybe that's just the fault of the type of story the games wanted to tell here. Either way, it gets a solid pass from me. Number 5. Now here's an item on the list that puzzles me to no end, to such an extent that I actually made a video vlog sort of thing a few years back, trying to hash out exactly why I don't really care for this game, or this series as a whole, and well, honestly, I can't say I came to any particularly hard conclusions. It just seems that The Elder Scrolls isn't for me, and Skyrim is the one that everyone else seems to heap praise upon more than the rest. In this case, though, I actually have even more of a leg to stand on when it comes to critique, because not only have I played this game, I also developed a mod for it, adding in an entirely new area and questline associated with it. I didn't want to, mind you, but I had to for a university thing. So I've been inside the game and designed stuff that would feel cohesive with it, which requires an understanding of the game in the first place, and thank you very much, I got about 95% on that module, so I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about here. In the video that I made in 2015 on this very subject, the closest thing to a conclusion that I found was that, as a general folly of being an open world game, it did absolutely nothing to engage me. And that's a philosophy I still hold on to this day. I have no love for open world games whatsoever that act like they're storytelling masterworks, because the core idea of having an open world is that you can do anything, anywhere, in more or less any order as long as you're skilled enough to do so, which means that there can't be much of an overall building plot, there can't be any story momentum, and there can't really be a difficulty curve with a rising climax to keep engagement, because you can do any of it in any order, so none of it matters. If your sole argument is, but don't you get the urge to go and explore, which yes, people have asked me about games like this before, then my answer is no. Skyrim especially gives me no incentive to connect to my character, or care about the world they inhabit, or feel anything for the myriad boring grayscale medieval villages dotted around the world whose name I can't even remember, and if I can't care about the world, why would I give a hoot about exploring any of it, much less the story you're half-assedly trying to tell me? Incidentally, I would imagine that this criticism probably applies to the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2, since that was released recently, but I haven't played it or seen much of it, so I can't fairly judge it. But it does look like it falls into exactly the same pitfalls here. Number 4. At this point in the video, I dare say we're getting into the definitely going to make some people very angry territory, so let's rip the plaster off right away. Earthbound, also known as Mother 2. This is a prime example of overrated but still objectively a good game. Perhaps it's selfish of me to call it overrated when I just don't like it because it doesn't align with my personal demographic, but then again, you might well use that defense on every item on this list, or for that matter, every game that's had any kind of feedback whatsoever, ever. I think, fundamentally, the issue is that without everything that makes Earthbound unique, it is just another RPG, and so if you don't like what does make it unique, there's not much here to hook you compared to its competitors. They say the difficulty curve is all sorts of wonky, especially at the start, to the point of being prohibitive to new players. The game's sense of humor is incredibly self-aware, and it's rather fond of a bizarre blend of surreal, gross-out, and psychological horror. And given that, or so they say, new things are still being found in the game's code to this day, you might call it impressive, Or you might say that it's trying too much. Your mileage may vary, but your opinion's valid either way. Thing is, I don't understand the appeal of gross-out humour, and that played a central role in the game's marketing back in the day. And it caused sales to tank accordingly, because ew. On top of that, self-aware humour really kind of needs a delicate touch, because otherwise all it does is repeatedly break the player's immersion, and if that happens one time too many, it's entirely too easy to stop caring about the game altogether. It's not quite as annoying as the lol so random postmodernist mimetic culture of the internet of the mid-2000s, but it's certainly cut from the same sort of cloth. I suppose what I mean to say is, while the game certainly does have its high points and well-executed moments and components and whatnot, it's just too exhausting to stay invested from start to finish. And because it's an RPG, there's quite a bit of distance between those 2 points. You feel? Number 3. I'll keep this one short and sweet. I'm not just going after the first loves of highly knowledgeable nerds here. I'm not just taking the gaming community's opinions into account, so let's turn our attention to the mainstream for a moment here, but not too long because you will go crazy. Online multiplayer games of any kind are already disengaging enough as it is for me. But when they hit mainstream stride and every Tom, Dick and Harry starts playing some multiplayer shooter thing and it consumes their lives, maybe I'm taking this term out of context, but it almost feels like appropriation of gaming culture. Almost. Team Fortress 2, Overwatch, Fortnite, guns don't interest me, team games don't interest me, servers full of screaming brats too young to be playing don't interest me. Perhaps part of me resents how popular these things are at the expense of representing or catering to literally any other genre of player. Perhaps I'm just a grumpy old man. Whatever. These games bore me, and part of me wonders how much of their player bases only find fun in them because they're the next big thing, and not because they'd actually like the game otherwise. Something not real gamers, I don't know. Next! Number 2. Following on from that, this one feels like a proper culmination of several points that I've already made in this video, a game that almost makes me feel angry because how widespread its public reception is, not that I want to sit back and cry, "Stop having fun!" but because it's not indicative of the name that it bears. Ugh. Good screaming grief, Breath of the Wild. In my opinion, and let me repeat that, in my opinion, it's far and away the worst Zelda game of all time. Not through a lack of quality as a game, but for a total lack of anything Zelda related at all. I won't deny that it is a Zelda game, because that's how it's branded and marketed. It is a true Zelda game, and that can't be argued with. But it carries nothing of what I come to a Zelda game for. Not since Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link or the Forbidden CDI games have there been an entry in the series that so painfully feels like a completely original intellectual property with Zelda characters slapped into it hastily just to get it to sell. And it's for that reason, it masquerading as being a representation of the franchise as a whole, that it saddens me to see it getting perfect scores from so many publications, online and otherwise. As I said earlier, open world games are, for me, flawed from the very start, and Zelda games get at least some of their appeal from the stories that they tell. You put yourself in Link's shoes and go on this adventure because you have a compelling reason to do so. Breath of the Wild's story is a detached patchwork of nonsense, with arbitrary numbers of years thrown in to make it sound mystical and deep and historical, and for how far removed it is from anything I come to a Zelda game for, I really couldn't give less of a damn about any of it. And again, I've seen a 100% Let's Play of it. I wanted to give it a chance. In return, all I got was what happens if a Skyrim fan wrote Zelda fanfiction. If it stood on its own as an original IP, I might forgive the critical acclaim on the understanding that it's just a game of a genre that I don't much care for, along the same lines as Metal Gear Solid, but the fact that it has the Zelda branding and associations just makes it feel like one massive betrayal to jump on the artificial open world Zelda bandwagon created by one very loud individual on the internet, or that's how it feels to me anyway, and I know you're not going to agree. And number 1. But in my eyes, what could be worse than a franchise betraying its roots in exchange for mass acclaim? How about several franchises all betraying their roots at once in the shape of an overcomplicated party game that takes itself beyond much too seriously? It really feels like I'm the only one on this entire planet, both on the internet and offline, who has less than zero love whatsoever for the Super Smash Bros. Side series. I'm not picking a single entry in the series for this list because they're all as bad as each other. All celebrated not because they stand on their own as fighting games, but just because people look at the lineup of familiar faces from different games and think that that alone is enough to justify their hype, further compounded by some utterly primate desires to see said famous faces beating the snot out of each other. No, keep going, don't mind me. I'll let you know when we hit upon something that sounds even remotely appealing. Even if you take all of that away and judge it as a set of game mechanics, I still have no love for it whatsoever. Yes, I've played it myself, and no, I'm not just salty because I'm bad at it. I'm not bad at it at all. I'd say I'm medium best, but still. I just heavily did not enjoy anything about my time behind the controller here. And that's saying nothing of the battle system itself, where instead of HP or like a health meter or something, characters have a percentage that goes up as they take damage, but reaching 100% doesn't necessarily mean they've been defeated. Say what you want, I think that's stupid. It's innovation for its own sake. It's a quirky gimmick that just adds an extra layer of convoluted inaccessibility to new players, alongside the aggression of its fan base and the skill ceiling of its competitive community, but make no mistake. Just because I bring that up, the whole competitive community, all of that stuff, that doesn't mean that I'd be interested in the game if that didn't exist, because no, I still wouldn't be. So no, not everyone likes Smash Brothers, and those apparently rare few of us that don't aren't any less valid for feeling that way. If you can't deal with that, go and take your aggression out on Fox only, Final Destination, no items. Whatever gets you going, I'm not putting any stock into it. Now, to close out, I just want to reiterate, in making this list, I'm not trying to tell people that they're not allowed to enjoy their favourite games. Quite the opposite, actually. I think you can tell a lot about someone by which games their opinions diverge on when compared to the masses. So, by all means, I am open to having civil discussions in the comments below. I will accept disagreeing opinions with open arms. I find it genuinely fascinating. And if you're hugely angry and offended at anything I've said and find my thoughts to be completely beyond redemption, and you're still watching this video by now, then sorry, but you are just objectively looking for reasons to get fighty, and I recommend you take a calming breath and go and do something that makes you happy instead, because I don't want to fight you here. As for everyone else, well, it's time that I signed off. So, as usual, super-de-duper-de thank you to the lovely people on patreon.com/TessHex, who not only powered this video, but actually also suggested it in the first place. So if you hate me, blame them for giving me the idea. That is but one perk among many should you choose to sign up and support me, alongside seeing these videos a month early, ad-free, just for signing up in the first place. More information in this video's iCard and in the description below. And on that note, I have been and will continue to be tessellating the social pariah Hexagons, and yeah, for the two people still here and not vomiting their guts out from pure hatred, loathing, and disagreement, I'll see you when next I see you. Bye-bye!